Chapter 1, Exfil. In Alexandria, Kingdom of Celdorne. Good news or bad news? King Armand Celdor had weighed such matters more times than he could reckon, yet at some point during his long reign, their import had withered. For truly, had there ever been a choice? Always a bitter draught, with scarce a drop of sweetness to ease its way down a regent's throat. Armand kept his gaze out over his kingdom, his reflection faintly visible on the window. There was little left to stir his spirit. The world had long since lost its color, as had the hope that his reign might be marked by aught but hardship. His prime minister stood behind him, though Armand scarcely took note. With a final glance at the overcast heavens, he steeled himself to choose. The bad first. Get it over with, Alric. Alric sighed, new lines forming on his already weathered face. Sire, the Aurelian Empire refuses our call for aid. Of course they did. They had no reason to lift a finger for Celdorne, no reason that wouldn't serve their precious borderlands. He had expected as much, but hearing it aloud still left a taste as bitter as Marnaleaf. And the others? Alric's next words came out barely above a whisper, though still deafening upon impact. The Kagarian Empire simply ignored our envoy, and the El Noir Republic. He paused, clearly wrestling with decorum. Armand sighed. What did they say? That the matter of our localized skirmish hardly merited the disturbance of their resources. They claim it is a threat we can manage. What could Armand do but laugh? A localized skirmish? As if the forces of hell itself could be dismissed as a border dispute. And manage. What did they know of such matters? Their vast resources, their summoned champions who held the strength of entire armies in one hand, they could afford such carelessness. But Celdorne? No, they were the first line, and they would bear the brunt of it alone. They languish in comfort while the storm gathers on our doorstep. How many would die for the arrogance, the complacency of these distant superpowers? The thought seethed within Armand. The king drew a slow breath, willing his frustration into something more manageable. Losing his composure now would serve no purpose, save to prove that the burden was already too great. There, he had his draught. Now, would the honey be sweet enough to erase the bitter taste? Well then, what good news have you to offer? His trusted minister swallowed, lips tight as he stepped forward. Sir Fotham's office reports that they've located suitable heroes for us to summon, though we can afford only one ritual. Summoning magic, their final refuge. But what meager candidates might they have summoned forth, given Celdorne's barren coffers? Had they but the wealth of Aurelia or Kagaria? Oh, such fancies would serve him naught. Armand held his peace, bidding Alric to continue. They hold power, though not what the great empires would call heroes, Alric began, treading carefully. One is a high schooler, from the nation of Japan, as summons so oft deliver. But the others, a group of soldiers, well-trained, an elite force of Delta, from a land called the United States. It, too, is a nation upon earth, yet we know but scant of it. Armand rested his arms on his knees, leaning forward. A child, and soldiers. Who else? Alric's hesitation was slight but noticeable. A scholar and a farmer, though neither are suited for the struggle we face. He paused, drawing a breath. The child, however, the high schooler, he possesses a skill, a power to manipulate time, not in some grand world-altering manner, but sufficient to slow or hasten moments as need dictates. We would need to train him, certainly. We can't gauge its limits, but the potential remains present. The king leaned back, shaking his head. Time. That is dangerous, Alric. More perilous than the boy can comprehend. And soldiers, not knights. The minister's hesitation was no longer present, words coming fluidly out of his mouth. They are skilled warriors, sire, knights of their own realm sans noble birth. Though they lack the natural magical prowess we oft ascribe to the summons of legend, their mana reserves are remarkable, far surpassing that of most within Celdorne. Our scrying has determined that their skills in combat are commendable. They may not shatter mountains, but their mastery of tactics and familiarity with firearms is formidable. Paired with magic, it just may render them into the aid we need. Armand took a breath. A child who may bend time, though ignorant of its scope. And soldiers, capable yet unremarkable compared to the legends of Tenria. The soldiers have no extraordinary gifts, no divine intervention. Common soldiers and a mere child. Armand felt the weight of it settle upon him, doubts clouding the clarity he so often forced upon himself. It was preferable to naught, but what hope could such beings offer in the face of a demonic tide? And yet he had seen desperate men achieve the impossible before. Even under Alexander Celdor's legendary command, it had been ordinary men who held the line, bleeding for a kingdom yet unbuilt, dying for a humanity yet unsaved. Perhaps that was the true nature of Celdorne, not heroes, but those who stood against the dark, armed with nothing but faith and steel, knowing they were all that held the world back from oblivion. "Soldiers," he repeated softly. He felt his decisions shifting like the sands of the demon-infested Istrain wastelands, solidifying the more he pondered. Not heroes, but still men of war. Alric nodded, as if they'd already earned his approval. "Indeed, sire, to summon 4 heroes with but one ritual, it is the most prudent of our options. They may not be legends, but in this great struggle, perhaps these men are precisely who we need." Truly, there was no grandeur in this, no tales of gods and legends. Yet he understood. Tales mattered little when the time for blood came. "Very well, soldiers then," Armand said at last. "When will they be summoned?" "Ere afternoon on the morrow, sire. We shall have them then. In Khaldat, al-Jadira, October 7th, 2025. Given the choice between good news or bad news, Captain Cole Mercer would have opted for no news at all, other than the arrival of a margarita, preferably on a Hawaiian beach. Hell, fuck the stereotype. He'd even take a drink with one of those little umbrellas that always looked so ridiculous, but somehow made the drink taste better. But alas, here he was instead, shoving his way through the crowded, seething heart of a Jadiran city on foot. He'd bunched up with his team, standing shoulder to shoulder with his medic, Mac. His breacher, Miles, and his explosives expert, Ethan, followed close behind. The protesters were everywhere, their raised signs reflecting their loyalties to the Jamaat al-Nadir al-Istiqama, the JNI. The government had done most of the work for them. Years of neglect, corruption, and empty promises had left these people desperate enough to believe in anything. And the JNI? They were more than happy to fill the void, selling martyrdom as salvation. All these people screaming for revolution, oblivious to the fact that their supposed saviors had just tried to turn them into radioactive martyrs. Some jihad that had a real je ne sais quoi about it, dying for a cause they barely understood. But it wasn't just the government or the JNI. No, someone had to go and fuck it up even further. CIA, Mossad, whoever. They'd all taken their turns poking the hornet's nest, funding the wrong factions, propping up the wrong leaders, all in the name of stability or democracy, or whatever buzzword they were using these days to mask their power grabs. And for all he knew, the usual suspects might have been in bed with the JNI themselves. Wouldn't be the first time someone decided to play both sides. Hell, it wouldn't even be the 10th. "Shitty-ass intel," Miles grumbled, the first thing he'd said since they found the bomb. "Ain't this city supposed to be under the Jadiran government's control? The fuck are all these nadir puppets doing crawling around out here? There could have been any host of reasons, from botched human to the simple assumption that the nadirs deliberately showed control in specific neighborhoods to play the city off as safe. Cole could only shrug in response. Wish I knew. Just hope Exfil ain't compromised. Their cloaks would probably fool the average person, but even that wouldn't matter if said person stood close enough to hear him breathing. Yeah, the cloaks provided a thin veneer of anonymity, but the bulky items under them, packs, vests, weapons, weren't exactly discreet. At best, they were a fragile defense, cover as functional as cardboard. As the tide of pro-JNI demonstrators rose, detection went from an extremely hopeful, maybe not, to a crushing inevitability. Even retracing was a no-go. Forward was the only viable option, however pyrrhic it might prove. Fuck it. He could see the car dealership in the distance, overlooking the park. Just a few more blocks and they'd be home free. The spinning sign flickered through gaps in the crowd, but the way there felt blocked at every turn. People pressed in on all sides now, moving shoulder to shoulder like it was a packed nightclub. The density forced Cole to thread through them, nudging where he could, pushing where he needed. The crowd pressed tighter, his heart thumping harder. And then his heart completely fucking sank. "Amrican!" The voice came from his right, from a teen pointing a finger at Cole. Fuck. He kept his head down and hood up, continuing to push forward. But the damage had already been done. "Amri Khan," the voices hissed again, more of the crowd waking up to the 4 American operators in their midst. 4 of the very devils the JNI had brainwashed them to hate. The crowd thickened, every shove met with another person stepping into their path, intentional or not. He grit his teeth, forcing the frustration back. These civilians weren't the enemy, not directly, but they were just as much a part of the plan as that dirty bomb they just disarmed. Human shields blocking his team's retreat as a final fuck you from the JNI to any souls unfortunate enough to stop their plan. They wouldn't be able to accomplish their mission, but they'd be able to trade blows with the U.S., removing valuable operators from the board. And of course, there was no helicopter exfil, the one thing that could have gotten them out of here clean. It wasn't that command hadn't considered it. Oh, they definitely had. But there was just no way to get a chopper in when half of Jadira's government leaned toward the JNI, whispering in the same rooms where the U.S. tried to maintain leverage. No way to open up the airspace for a nuclear threat, when that threat had been all but a conspiracy theory until now. A few dead Americans? That was just a blip to the powers that be, not worth jeopardizing relations over. The emerging sound of vehicles cemented their sorry situation. They were at the mercy of red tape, praying for action from a command that was at the mercy of the most asinine politicians and diplomats to ever grace this earth. The vehicles finally approached, pickup trucks with mounted .50s, technicals. The sea of people blocking his escape, angry, confused, manipulated, wasn't something he could just shoot his way through. Evidently, the JNI had no such reservations. As the gunmen swiveled their turrets onto the crowd, Cole ducked. "Get down!" He hit the pavement, dragging Miles down with him as the sharp crack of heavy machine gun fire split the air. 50 caliber rounds ripped through flesh and concrete alike, bodies crashing down in a mix of blood and bone. A wet spray splattered across Cole's arm, the warmth of it seeping into his cloak. The crowd erupted into screams, raw panic settling in as they realized what was happening. The demonstration devolved into a human stampede, people pushing, shoving, climbing over each other to get away from the gunfire. Fuck! He wriggled his hand down to his push-to-talk button, careful that it wouldn't get crushed. Aegis, Sentinel Actual, Grid 38 SRV 130563. Exfil is compromised. were pinned down near the intersection of Sharia al-Hariri and Sharia al-Shahid. JNI forces opened fire into a crowd of civilians, heavy civilian casualties. No team casualties yet, but the situation is critical. Need immediate fire support and reinforcements to break contact. Over. Cole adjusted his body, shielding himself from the inevitable as best he could. Weight slammed into him, someone's knee crushing into his ribs, the wind knocked from his lungs as another body pressed down, trying to use him as leverage to scramble up. His back and chest burned from the impacts as more people fled, some of them stumbling, others outright trampling over him. He gasped, his breath stuck in his throat as the weight piled up. Sentinel Actual, Aegis. Solid copy on all. QRF and fire support are on standby, but we are awaiting confirmation from the Jadiran government to open airspace. EOD teams are en route to confirm the bomb. Hold position and minimize civilian exposure. Prepare for contingencies, but no air assets can engage until clearance is secured. Stay sharp. Aegis, out. Oh, fucking A. He stayed down, instinct overriding the urge to move. The dead weight on top of him shifted slightly, more blood pouring out onto his cloak, soaking it through, as if one blanket of despair wasn't enough. He rolled his head to the side, feeling the blood creeping under his cheek. It wasn't his. The pavement had become slick, a red sheen coating everything in sight. It wasn't just blood, it was guts, sweat, dirt, all mixing into a thick slurry that made every inch of the street a deadly slip zone. The permeating scent of iron wasn't any easier to stomach. Amidst the chaos, he forced himself to shift the weight off his back and freed his arms. The gunfire slowed, then finally stopped. This was it. He scrambled up, the blood-soaked pavement making it harder to keep his balance. The AK-74 in his hands snapped up, locking onto the nearest gunner. The man tried to bring his turret down on Cole, but it was too late. One quick burst was all it took. The rounds punched into the gunner's chest and neck, his body slumping forward and collapsing onto the turret. His dead weight shifted the gun, and the turret shifted wildly to the side. The barrel swung back toward the other JNI forces, the weapon firing briefly and indiscriminately until the dead man's finger finally fell away from the trigger. With a tap from his FAL, Ethan had simultaneously eliminated the gunner on the second technical, though lacking the dramatic chain reaction. Taking advantage of the chaos, they retreated into a nearby cafe, laying down suppressive fire on the remaining JNI forces. The shattered windows and overturned tables provided minimal cover, but it would suffice for now. Miles swept inside while Cole and Ethan maintained their attention outside, gunning down the insurgents foolish enough to pop their heads out of cover. Cole tapped twice on Ethan's shoulder, directing him to maintain their defense while he turned to assess the situation. He was about to call out orders when he caught sight of Mac, huddled in the corner, kneeling in front of a kid on a chair. Fuck. What the hell had happened? The boy, no more than 6 or 7, clung to Mac's side. That was about the age Mac's kid would have been, if not for his wife's miscarriage. The kid was pale, hands gripping Mac's vest tightly. But there was blood. A deep scarlet, spreading stain soaked the front of the boy's shirt. Mac lifted the shirt, but it was too much. Even Cole knew. There was nothing they could do to save him. Cole placed a hand on his medic's shoulder. Mac, we need to move. Mac nodded, resting a hand on the boy's knee before speaking. His tone was gentle, but it was the kind reserved for goodbyes. Everything is gonna be okay. It was a blatant lie, sure, but maybe the kid needed that more than the truth. As he stood up, Cole noticed it, a gaping wound on Mac's side. Aw, fuck. He quickly turned Mac around, confirming the exit wound on the other side, with bitter relief. Let's keep moving, Mac decided. You can patch me up later. His voice was steady for now, the adrenaline probably carrying him. Still upright, still operational, but Cole knew the window was closing. The blood loss would hit hard soon. Mac, always the bleeding heart. Now he was literally bleeding for it, a tragic symmetry wrapped in shitty irony. Miles returned just in time to catch the bad news, but his report brought a bit of a reprieve. Backside's clear. There's a construction site up ahead, too tight for vehicles. Cole took it for what it was, a brief opening, but better than nothing. He could tend to Mac once they got there. He turned to Ethan, calling out, "Walker, we're moving out the back." The man already shifted to cover their exit. Cole slung Mac's arm over his shoulder and swapped to his sidearm, allowing his rifle to hang on its sling. Mac's weight slowed him down, but they moved fast, pushing through the alley behind the cafe. The construction site wasn't far, just past a crumbling wall and a half-finished block of buildings. Taking down a pair of insurgents, they crossed into the site. An open area littered with piles of concrete blocks, rusted scaffolding, and the skeleton of a garage. It definitely wasn't ideal cover, but it would suffice for now. Cole glanced around, clear for now, but painstakingly temporary as all respites were. The nadirs would be converging on them soon. Citadel, Sentinel Actual, Grid 38 SRV 128563, were pinned down near the intersection of Sharia al-Hariri and the construction site. One wounded, combat ineffective, requesting immediate CASEVAC and fire support. Over. The radio hissed back at Cole, the white noise deafening in its indifference, as if mocking the hope he barely allowed himself to feel. Then came the saving grace. Sentinel Actual, Aegis. Airspace cleared. 24 STS is en route to your location. ETA is 20 mics. City is crawling with JNI. Recommend holding position until reinforcements arrive. Prepare for CASVAC and stand by for further instructions. Aegis, out. Fucking finally. But 20 fucking minutes? With the nadirs on their way in a city supposedly full of them? They were sitting ducks, praying they didn't get found, praying none of the insurgents from earlier had managed to point out their location before dying. Cole turned his attention back to Mac, Ethan, and Miles already holding the perimeter. We got friendlies inbound, but we're fucked for the next 20. Imma patch you up quick, so lay down, face up, all right? Mac nodded, twisting to remove his backpack. Cole accepted it, digging out the advanced first aid kit lodged within. Gauze and Curlix first, disinfect later, Mac wheezed out. Cole nodded, packing the wound with combat gauze. Blood soaked through quickly, but it'd hold for now. Applying pressure, he wrapped the wound tight with the Curlix roll and secured it all with an ace bandage. Mac's voice verged on hoarseness, but thank God it still maintained coherency. Morphine, inject. Cole pulled out the morphine injector and jabbed it into Mac's thigh, then grabbed another. Nah, one was enough. He didn't want to overdo it just yet. Mac groaned. Epi, keep pressure up. He complied, pulling out the epinephrine injector from his kit and pressing it into Mac's arm. Cole worked as fast as he could, moving on to setting up the saline bag and IV line as pallor crept up to Mac's face. But what came after saline? Mac seemed to sense what Cole was thinking. His breath was shallow, but he forced the next words out. TXA, in the kit, prevents clots from breaking down. Ethan shouted something from the other side, but Cole couldn't afford to look. He fished out the vial. Tranexamic acid. He had no clue what the hell it was, but if Mac said to use it, he wasn't gonna argue. Fuck it, he muttered, jamming it into the line. Hemaxel now, wit, he coughed, with the saline. Cole prepped the Hemaxel bag next, gunfire already starting to echo throughout the concrete structure. All right, now the Fent. In my pack, Mac rasped. Actique, lollipop. First time guys ever asked me for a lollipop, Cole smirked, almost forcing a laugh. He grabbed the Actic stick, shoving it into Mac's mouth. Suck, don't swallow. This ain't that kind of party. A faint, pained chuckle escaped Mac as he clenched weakly around the stick. The drug worked fast, the lines on his face easing a bit. Mac's breath hitched again. Just bought a couple hours, if I'm lucky. Shit, a couple of hours? They'd be lucky to make it 5 minutes. The gunfire grew more intense, a brief lull settling in as Ethan and Miles made it back to his position. "How's it looking?" Miles asked, positioning himself behind a stack of rebar. "Max stabilized for now. He'll make it, but," Cole said, glancing down at his watch, "our guys are still 10 minutes out." "Shit," Ethan muttered. Miles kept staring forward, breaking the subsequent silence with a sigh. "To Valhalla, then." "Well, it's been a hell of a ride," Cole mustered up his best pep talk. "If you really think about it, we basically stopped World War III. And hey, at least we can get the show on the road with the Jadirans now." "Man, fuck the Jadirans," Mac muttered, slurring every word except fuck, which unsurprisingly came out clear as day. Cole snorted. "Yeah, fuck the Jadirans." As if presenting that exact opportunity on a silver platter, the first wave of J&I fighters poured in, making their way up the garage's ramp and exterior stairway. This wave, it seemed, had hardly received any training in urban combat, or in any combat for that matter. Cole's muzzle flashed as 3 insurgents dropped, bodies dropping on the concrete ramp. Walker fired over the edge onto the hapless remnants below, who scrambled for cover with all the futility of resisting the Borg. The next 4 ascending the stairway crumpled, Miles dispatching them like hunting easy game. 8 minutes left. Of course, the moment Cole felt any sliver of hope, reality immediately crushed it. More tires screeched to a halt outside, and he risked a peek. They dealt with the first wave easily enough. But this, it dwarfed it, a force 5 times the size, with fighters who looked like they'd survived more than a few battlefields. "Well," Miles said, finally turning to Cole, "guess I'll get this out while I still can. Your sister's hot as hell." Cole ejected a spent magazine, slamming a fresh one in. "Needed certain death to get that one off your chest, huh?" He scoffed. "All right, if we make it back home, I'll be sure to tell her you said that at your funeral." Miles smirked, but it simmered as he adopted a more serious tone. "But for real, though, it's an honor to die at your side." Well, that was a sentimental side he hadn't expected out of him. Cole paused as he searched for an appropriate response, something he'd seen in a movie once. "It's an honor to have lived at yours, all of you." A bit cheesy, maybe, but it felt right in his heart. If anyone thought it didn't fit, fuck 'em. The wind whipped up suddenly, swirling dust and debris through the garage, and only the garage, curiously enough. Outside, insurgents advanced across the lot, oblivious to the localized maelstrom. "The hell?" Ethan muttered. The swirling intensified, kicking up more dust. Beneath their feet, glowing lines etched themselves into the concrete, a familiarity that sang of countless nights, devouring questionable manga and anime. Ethan and Miles traded baffled looks, clearly not privy to Cole's epiphany. The air around them bent, warping like heat off Jadiran asphalt. Their world peeled away, unraveling as the light grew. A million thoughts overwhelmed Cole. Fuck, what would his sister think? She'd no doubt received that dreaded visit from uniformed officers, carrying that dreaded folded flag, thrust into the dreaded finality of a memorial service with an empty casket. At the same time, he couldn't ignore the Lord's truly impeccable timing, and the fact that they'd be getting a second chance, the fact that Mac could yet survive. "No fucking wah!" The light consumed them. Everything folded inward, collapsing into that glowing circle.
Chapter 2. Arrival. They weren't dead, not in the conventional sense anyway. How long had it been? An instant, a day. The last thing he remembered was gunfire, Miles wanting to fuck his sister, and a mob of zealots chasing martyrdom. Now it was silent stone underfoot, the sudden absence of the Jadiran chaos both disorienting and, oddly enough, a relief. That, and a strange pressure point along his spine that hadn't been there before. Just as he'd figured, they'd been Isekai'd. Of course, it could be one of those foobar versions where being summoned was a fate worse than death, but even that beat their last stand at the garage. Better odds for him, and thank God for Mac. He'd still need real treatment, but here at least they had a shot. Cole took in the room, stone walls, bare, save for the glowing inscriptions carved into the surface. Runes, if he had to guess. They didn't mean much to him, but they were obviously more than decoration. Likely some kind of defense? The guards were another story. They wore scaled brigandine armor, reinforced with composite layering that looked built to absorb impacts as much as deflect them. Half knight, half rifleman, they were equipped for both close combat and ranged attack. Odd, but perhaps even necessary given the evidential existence of magic. Above all, their gear had the unmistakable look of standardization. Identical armor, rifles of the same model. Somebody had clearly put some serious thought into this setup. "Yo, what the actual fuck?" Miles muttered beside them. His voice sounded tense as shit, but the lack of reaction from the guards suggested he'd at least kept most of his cool. Apparently the guards had prepared for the summoning quite well. They stood in a loose formation, hands on weapons but pointed down, ready but not aggressive. The guards struck a balance, vigilant enough to manage any unexpected hostility, yet restrained to avoid provoking it. Their numbers and firepower rendered any thought of forcing an exit futile. But then, given their stance and respectful demeanor, it didn't seem Cole would need that option anyway. Cole kept his stance mirrored to theirs, rifle at the low ready, not aiming. A quick glance confirmed Ethan and Miles had caught on as well, following his lead. Discipline kept them sharp and ready, as much as possible for guys who'd just been Isekai'd. No doubt, fighting through shock worse than Cole's, they spread out to form a loose cordon around Mac. Directly before them stood a man who didn't match the guards. Middle-aged, dressed like some court official from a bygone era, he projected a calm authority. His stance was open, hands visible and empty, almost like a police negotiator sizing up a standoff. A diplomat, maybe, or something similar. From the lack of hostility, it seemed like they were about to be crowned heroes. But Cole knew better than to buy into the pageantry. He'd seen enough Isekai to know settings like these had a habit of chewing up saviors and spitting out scapegoats. Sure, letting anime guide his thinking felt a bit absurd, but the caution was sound and his instincts backed it up. Identify yourselves. Sir Fotham Fallamore, Director of Thaumaturgy, at your service, gentlemen. The man gave a light bow, answering in English. Naturally. After all, what was an Isekai without a built-in auto-translator? The man's lips synced perfectly with the words, oddly enough. So many questions, but Cole could pick it apart later. Top priority was getting a read on this situation. He continued, "On behalf of the Kingdom of Celdorne, I welcome you to the planet of Tenria. I shall trust that you will pardon this sudden change of scene, though I must think, given the peril you left behind, that it might yet prove something of a reprieve." A reprieve? So he knew. That meant this wasn't some blind summoning ritual. They were handpicked. How flattering. And the way Fotham spoke with that polished, genteel elegance? Well, Cole could appreciate the nuance. It took skill to convey gratitude and expectation all in one breath. His Majesty, King Armand de Celdorne, as you might expect, extends his deepest gratitude for your timely appearance here, though I imagine you find yourselves drawn in rather less willingly than you would prefer. Cole felt a scoff bubbling inside him. Less willingly was a hell of an understatement, but he had to admit they were alive. While he could see the framing of this gratitude, a gambit in diplomatic parlance, it was hard to deny that they owed some thanks. There was a debt here, however unasked for. Nevertheless, here we are, bound together by circumstance, improbable though it may be. We shall, of course, see to your companion's recovery without delay, a small token of goodwill, if you will. One which, I dare say you might recall when we speak further on matters of service, you may render to the crown. And once he is settled, rest assured I shall gladly explain all that has transpired to bring you hither as far as knowledge permits. So that was the game, a gesture of goodwill coupled with a request dressed in decorum. How convenient they had to get summoned at the paradoxically worst and best time possible. Still, Cole respected the finesse. They'd bought his team's lives with magic, and now the tab was due. But for Mac's sake, he could play along, let them do their token of goodwill, and then get the lay of the land. Gratitude wasn't blind after all, and he'd make sure they held on to enough leverage to navigate this, but how exactly were they gonna see to Mac's recovery? Magic? It sounded great in theory, but there was no way he'd trust it implicitly. Too many variables. He had no idea how they handled the basics of wound care. Maybe they had germ theory. Maybe they used magic in place of disinfectants, or maybe they didn't bother at all, assuming the spells took care of it. And what about debris? The bullet that hit Mac passed straight through, but if it hadn't, if they thought healing meant just sealing the skin, that might trap all sorts of foreign particles inside. Past that, being able to heal tissue didn't mean they'd catch internal issues like bleeding or damaged nerves. A quick fix wouldn't do Mac any favors if they missed something deeper. All right, Cole conceded. Let me clean the wound first. I ain't letting you do a thing either, not until I know exactly what you intend to do. Fotham offered a slight smile. Our healing, I grant you, may appear unconventional to you, but I assure you it's quite comprehensive. We address the wound in its entirety. Both seen and unseen harms, if you will, but by all means, tend to your companion as you see fit. I'd think no less of it. Cole peeled back Mac's bandaging. Blood started seeping out again, filling the air with the scent of iron. At least it wasn't bright red, no arterial spray. He pressed gauze over it, applying enough pressure to slow the bleed, but not too much to cause more damage. Grabbing the saline, he flushed the wound. Everything seemed fine so far. Aside from the clear shock and blood loss, he then applied the disinfectant, which elicited a short cough from Fotham. Cole ignored it, focusing on the wound. After coating the area thoroughly, he removed the bloodied bandages, clearing the way for the healers. It was risky, trusting them to this extent, but there was no other option. Cole understood first aid as well as any other operator, but he was no medic, and he was certainly no surgeon. The only viable option, as much as he disliked it, was to gamble with magic. He stepped back, giving Fotham a nod. The two healers approached, an older guy who looked like he'd seen his fair share of battlefields, and a blonde girl with pointy ears. An elf, if he was seeing things right, who looked just out of her 20s. Then again, if she was an elf, who knew what that meant? Cole figured the older guy was the lead, but it was the girl who moved in. Hands aglow with a soft white light. She held her hand over the cleaned wound while the older guy kept the region isolated with barriers. Small particles floated upward. Dead skin. Debris that the flush missed. It was a small detail, but it at least showed they had protocol. Thorough, yes. A comfort of sorts. But that didn't mean he could trust the process. No gloves? Concerning, but maybe they didn't need any. As the light shifted from white to green, the skin around the wound began to knit itself together. Jesus Christ, Ethan breathed, turning slightly away, yet still drawn to it, like watching a live leak video. Miles apparently wasn't spared from it either. Hell, that ain't right. The process was far from the clean antiseptic affair of sci-fi or the pleasant warmth of the fictional magic he'd been exposed to. Shit, this was biology laid bare, accelerated to a nauseating degree. Tendrils of red snaked through the wound, layers of tissue writhing and fusing over them like hateful flesh. He'd seen his fair share of gore. Hell, he'd caused plenty of it. But this little foray into body horror easily took the cake as some of the most grotesque shit he had ever seen. And the kicker? Where moments ago there'd been a gaping wound, now there was only unblemished skin. Efficient, sure. Effective, terrifyingly so. Easy on the eyes. Fuck no. What unsettled him even more was how easily magic dismantled the laws of physics. It'd be less disturbing, of course, if Cole could do the same. Could he? The glow faded from the girl's hands, magic dissipating like mist. Mac's chest rose faintly, breathing, but barely. His abdomen looked good as new, yet he lay there, still looking 1 foot in the grave. Logic dictated that if they could conjure new tissue, new blood shouldn't be an issue. Cells were cells, after all. So why did Mac look like he was running on empty? The despondent look on the younger healer's face landed hard. She quickly suppressed it, but the truth was already laid bare. Cole gauged his teammates' reactions, then turned back to the blonde. How long is he going to be like this for? I cannot yet say. The procedure taxed his body greatly. It's not unheard of for patients to lapse into such states after surviving injuries as severe as his. The healer continued, apparently catching his frown. She explained, regrettably, it is not without consequence. It shall take some time ere he is restored in full. His faculties have thus receded, as it were. Yet fear not. These episodes of profound lethargy are oft attendant upon recovery from injuries nigh unto death. Profound lethargy? The linguistics of this place struck Cole as a bit strange, possibly archaic, but he could parse it well enough. To his knowledge, there was only one condition that matched that description. Cole looked down at Mac. He looked worse than he had in that cafe, sallow and sunk into himself. A coma, then? So all we need to do is just wait, and he'll be fine? The woman nodded. Most recover within a month. Might we bring him to the infirmary? As if he had any other choice. Lead the way, Cole sighed. The two healers lifted Mac with an ease that bordered on the absurd 200-odd pounds rendered inconsequential. The older guy especially. He shouldn't have been able to manage it, not without straining. Instead, they barely shifted their stance, the only clue of faint glow outlining their bodies as they set Mac on a stretcher. Some sort of strengthening magic, maybe. Cole signaled Ethan and Miles, and they fell in behind the procession as guests, with Fotham and a handful of knights escorting them. They exited the barren summoning chamber, a structure so fortified it might as well have been a citadel unto itself. The sheer concentration of guards and magical devices spoke volumes about the Celdornians and their caution, playing several roles, a show of force, intimidation, and especially containment. It was real prudent of them, given the inherent risks of yanking unknown entities across realities. The winding corridors, all lacking windows or any external reference point, only validated the idea further. True, it was a damn fine display of defensive architecture, but it was hardly conducive to building trust with one's interdimensional guests. It was hardly the ideal backdrop for diplomatic discourse either. Still, beggars couldn't be choosers, and Cole had to start somewhere. So, Sir Fotham, looks like you've held up your end. Let's get straight to it then. Why'd you summon us? Anything you're allowed to tell us for this little tete-a-tete? Fotham smiled. Your perspicacity does you credit, hero. Rest assured, I'll be as forthcoming as circumstances allow. To answer you directly, we face an existential threat, a demonic incursion. They seek the destruction of mankind. We've several years to prepare to ready ourselves. Summoned as the kingdom's personal deus ex machina, brought from one battle to the next. He almost wanted to ask if it was optional, if he could spelunk away. But hoping for a slice of life at this stage was admittedly wishful thinking. And that's where we come in, I take it? Indeed, Fotham replied. Every century, a new demon lord rallies his hordes against us. Our preparations this time required additional assistance. Cole felt his lips curl into what probably came off as a rather unpleasant smile. Huh, and you just so happened to procure arguably the best fighting force on Earth. What, did you get us on sale? Or are we just that good of an investment? I suppose one might contend so. Quality, after all, oft surpasses mere quantity, no? Cole eyed Ethan and Miles, searching for a read. Ethan's response was restrained as usual, a tight-lipped nod like he was agreeing to a bad bet. Miles, though, jumped right in. Hell, I'm guessing a thanks, but no thanks ain't exactly on the table neither, is it? Oh, I suppose we could see you returned if that be your inquiry, though I dare say you'd find yourselves precisely where you began, with nary a moment's difference. One wonders if that would truly satisfy your curiosity or merely prove an exercise in futility, no? Right. So, basically a death sentence. It was a Hobson's choice in the purest sense, not that he'd expected otherwise. Cole studied Fotham's face for any hint of deception. Got it. Stay here and fight your demons or go back and die immediately. Hell of a choice, I must say. Was he lying? Maybe, maybe not. That was the one thing he hated about diplomats and spooks alike. They didn't just have the best poker faces around, they showed the world exactly what they wanted it to see. It was impossible to get reliable intelligence out of them. No lie, no truth, not even a half-truth. Just a whole lot of nothing. Fotham tilted his head in acknowledgement, but he clearly had a comeback ready. Yes, I suppose it might seem a touch dramatic from your perspective, but I assure you you're at liberty to decline our proposal should you desire. Ethan finally spoke up. So we can just walk away? No obligations, no strings attached? Oh, you may walk away if you like, Fotham replied, waving a hand with what looked like indifference, though Cole doubted he was half as relaxed as he wanted to seem. You're welcome to live as you please here in Celdorne. I'd only caution that when the demons arrive, and they will, they shan't be selective in their slaughter. You'd be fighting for survival in a world reduced to ashes, but do feel free to opt for that quaint sort of freedom. Cole frowned. It seemed like they really did have no other option. Fight for a world that could still be saved, or wander off and watch it burn around us. Same shit, different toilet, Miles grumbled. Hajis for demons? Hell, just another fancy way of saying we ain't got a choice. Think of it less as an ultimatum and more as a courtesy. We offer you the chance to make a difference, to prevent the demons from leveling every last corner of this realm. Should you refuse, of course, you'd be left to brave the aftermath, but I'd wager you wouldn't much care for the scenery. Spotting the first window they'd seen since their arrival, they reached the infirmary at last. Fotham and his guards stepped to the sides, permitting their entry. A chill met them as they entered, drawing Cole's gaze upward. Spheres lined the walls, smooth and linked by copper pipes that led to a box mounted outside one of the windows. A cooling system, evidently. Pretty damn pragmatic for a world seemingly enamored with the arcane. At least they understood the value of keeping things cool. Great for infection control, and not a bad perk for summer and food storage either. The floor of the infirmary itself was lined with cots, all etched with runes, likely enchanted for healing. Well, if it worked, it worked. Most of the tools looked familiar enough, the scalpels and vials anyway. Cole could hardly guess at what the fluids in said vials might be for, or what the crystalline rings on a corner table were supposed to do. The healers eased Mac down on one of the cots, the older guy leaving to tend to another patient, while the blonde elf immediately checked his eyes with ungloved hands. Honestly, it still felt off, a jarring deviation from ingrained protocol. But hey, maybe they really did know what they were doing. Their earlier performance, the magic cleansing, the isolation barriers, hell, even the cooling and ventilation in this room, all pointed to a grasp of germ theory that, while primitive by modern standards, was functional enough. Ethan walked up, standing over Mac's unconscious form. He looked at the elf. You said he just needed a month of rest, right? The girl gave a reassuring smile, the same kind doctors use to calm a worried relative. Yes, and fear not. He will have our full attention as he recovers. Our healers attend at all hours. Should there be any change, you'll be informed without delay. Cole glanced down at Mac. It was all up to his body and the healers now. All right, he sighed, returning to the elf. Thank you, Dr. Elena Gracer, the girl said, offering a smile. Just call me Elena. Yes, thank you, Elena, Cole said, giving a nod to Miles and Ethan. As they regrouped, Miles addressed Fotham. All right, so what are we in for with this king of yours? Fair warning, I ain't got the slightest clue about all that noble etiquette business. I'd rather not get myself axed on my first day here. You have little to worry about, provided you observe even the slightest modicum of civility. His Majesty, you see, appreciates frankness. By all means, speak freely. Of course, do not neglect proper decorum. Hence, it is proper to address him as Your Majesty. Got it. Anything else? Cole asked. Should you accept the king's proposition, you shall find Celdorne quite prepared to cultivate your talents. You will be trained not only in combat, but in the use and control of your latent magic. Further, you'll be instructed in the fundamental aspects of our kingdom's culture, its customs, currency, written language, and other necessities that will enable your adaptation. All will prepare you for your role as slayers under the Office of Threat Assessment and Control. Cole cocked an eyebrow. Well, that wasn't too bad, all things considered. Fotham's little info dump was as revealing in its omissions as its admissions. Generosity was just a veil. If they were willing to invest this much in them, the demons must be quite the shit show. At least the JNI killed their targets quickly. No doubt they'd soon be wishing they'd taken the offer to return home. And if we say no? Fotham shrugged. Well, my offer of citizenship was entirely sincere. You would receive a reimbursement sufficient to establish yourselves comfortably. You would, of course, be at liberty to pursue a life of your choosing, though without the resources and stature accorded to slayers. After a pause, Fotham continued, regardless of the path you choose, rest assured, your man shall receive our full care until he is entirely restored. Quite the info dump to process, and with those opulent double doors looming ahead, time to let it sink in was at a premium. Par for the course, really. Overload the new arrivals with exposition, then whisk them off before they could reason it out. Cole could only hope His Majesty would deign to give them at least a day to reflect, though that, of course, hinged on the rather optimistic assumption that the king gave two shits about their thoughts on the matter. After all, why risk the new heroes getting cold feet? Far simpler to present their glorious destiny as a fait accompli. One small concession at a time, that was Fotham's game. Heal the dying friend, earn the trust, then oh so casually suggest they might want to look less like a blood-spattered death squad before their royal debut. Fair enough. Cole could definitely respect that. The military-style garments were a nice touch, practical enough as a replacement for their fatigues, proper enough for court, and just happened to make them look like they already belonged. They'd keep their tactical gear naturally. That wasn't up for negotiation, and their gracious host knew better than to push that particular envelope. The opportunity to wash away all that blood, on the other hand, was an offer Cole readily accepted, and naturally their little makeover funneled them into whatever Fotham had orchestrated. Look the part, play the part, become the part, all before they'd officially agreed to anything. Well, at least they wouldn't have to fuck up the first impression by looking like murder hobos from some edgelord's manhwa. As they arrived, two sentries stepped forward, pushing the doors open. "Gentlemen," Fotham said, stepping aside, "His Majesty awaits." Chapter 3, Celdorne. Each new sight really lightened Cole's opinion of Celdorne. A throne room, historically, should represent power, architectural dick-measuring rendered in marble and gold leaf. But the choke point past the doors and the firing slits overhead suggested someone who understood the difference between showing power and keeping it. Not much of a surprise, considering the practicality of the interior design in the summoning chamber and the infirmary. Similarly, the king defied easy categorization. Those ears gave away elven blood, shorter than the healer's but distinctly pointed, which made his apparent age a puzzle. Middle-aged by human standards, hair graying at the temples, but half-elven biology threw all those markers into question. Even his authority broke the monarchical playbook. Instead of some ostentatious crown, he wore just a simple circlet, though the sheen of the metal and the way those inset gems caught the light suggested simple might be relative when it came to magical enhancements. Either way, he had the look of someone who'd long since dispensed with ceremonial bullshit in favor of getting things done. Well, it basically tracked with everything else so far. At last, I had wondered what manner of soldiers might answer our call. Not exactly the warmest welcome, but then again, Cole doubted anyone felt particularly cheerful about this arrangement. "I am Armand Celdor, King of Celdorne. And you are?" Cole bowed. "Captain Cole Mercer of the United States Army, Your Majesty. With me are Sergeants Miles Garrett and Ethan Walker." "You may raise your heads. I trust Director Fallimore has explained something of our situation?" "He has, Your Majesty." When Armand spoke again, it was with the direct attention of a commander evaluating troops, instead of a king entertaining guests. "You would not be the first to stand against the tide, but I would hear your thoughts on the matter." Cole had to admire the king's technique, skip past with the whole "will you help us" dialogue. Create the illusion of choice while boxing them into the desired outcome. Though really, what choice was there? Certain death versus a hero's welcome. Obvious enough, but he still wanted to think it through. The right answer wouldn't change by morning, but the best decisions were the ones he could still defend after a night's sleep. "We'd like some time to think it over," Cole said. The faint smile that crossed the king's face suggested he'd expected as much. Of course. Take what time you require to reach your decision, he gestured to Fotum. In the meantime, Director Fallamore shall show you about the grounds and, rather more consequential, determine the extent of your magic. Magic. Right. After all those late nights of Isekai'd, the chance to actually test his own magical potential. Funny how that thought alone could almost make him forget his family would have to bury an empty coffin. Almost. The guest wing stands ready for you. You may select your own chambers, Armand continued. Your servants will bring your evening meal there. The scrying pane upon the wall acts as a window between us. Should word arrive of your companion in the infirmary, or should you wish to speak, we may converse through it. Take the night to consider. We shall meet again on the morrow. A scrying pane, huh? Magical FaceTime sounded real useful, even before considering the implications of real-time communication in warfare. Somehow it was both a blessing and a curse being presented with a fait accompli like this. Less time racking their brains over a decision, more time analyzing what they had to work with. Cole bowed, following the director's lead. Man, Miles's voice was quiet as they exited the throne room. Mac's gonna lose his shit when he wakes up. All them D&D sessions, and now, hell, we're actually getting tested for magic. Cole chuckled, almost needing to force it. The comment landed differently than intended. Everyone caught the when. But at least it gave them something to think about. Another distraction from the reality that now faced them. Cole remembered how Mac would go on about magic theory in his games, especially the one time he stuck a ring of enlargement in front of his gun. He'd probably have 1,000 questions about how magic worked here. Probably. Shit, definitely. Turning the corner and seeing the aesthetics of the hallway shift from dark stone to comfortable wood brought Cole back to the present. He addressed Fotham. So, Director, how exactly does one measure magical potential? Fotham led them down the wood-paneled corridor. Honestly, the atmosphere wouldn't look out of place in one of those old universities, Harvard, Oxford, and such. We find ourselves obliged to make use of an apparatus called a manometer, being no more elaborate than a sequence of graduated chambers which measures the concentration of mana. Well, that was different. Usually these scenarios involved touching some glowing crystal ball that lit up with convenient color coding. The term manometer suggested something far more precise. Celdorne's fascination with Victorian methodology was starting to read less like an aesthetic choice and more like fundamental principle. Not that Cole would complain. In fact, it ranked among the few redeeming features of this impromptu Isekai'd. The procedure itself is, I assure you, possessed of an almost elegant simplicity. You need only cast a barrier spell at a prescribed distance while this clever little device performs its measurement. We've multiple safeguards to ensure the pressure of any mana does not result in a shower of glass. They stopped at a door with a brass placard. The foreign script provided the first tangible limitation to the translation magic that had gotten them smoothly through first contact. Perhaps Fotham's offer to teach them about Celdorne's culture wasn't mere courtesy after all. Beyond the placard, and despite the castle's medieval trappings, lay a decidedly academic space. Metal-reinforced walls and copper-like mesh across the windows hinted at some form of isolation, probably from ambient magic given the context. The familiar shapes of thermometers and barometers along one wall suggested environmental monitoring. Whatever that purple liquid was, it still had to follow basic physics. A tall glass instrument dominated the far corner, a series of 7 identical bulbs connected vertically, rising from a base reservoir where the measurement fluid sat inert. Each bulb bore 3 distinct markings, likely indicating ranges, given how the liquid would need to fill one chamber before overflowing to the next. A simple line marked the floor 3 feet from the device, also marked with unknown numerals. The attention to detail tracked with everything else they'd seen so far. As with all matters of precision, Fotham said, indicating the line, we find ourselves bound by standardization. Now then, shall we address the barrier spell itself before proceeding to any tests? One ought to begin with fundamentals, I dare say. Cole gave him a nod. The director brought them to a series of anatomical diagrams along the wall. The manipulation of mana, you see, stems from a particular gland near the spine, the nerves directing its secretions while the blood bears its influence throughout one's person. Not unlike the way fear or excitement spreads its effects through the body. if you take my meaning. The diagrams showed cross-sections of human anatomy. Someone had clearly indulged in a rather excessive number of dissections to achieve this level of detail. Though the alien labels meant nothing, Fotham's earlier gestures made the subject clear enough. The weird-ass pressure point he'd felt since arriving. It just so happened to coincide right where their Victorian anatomists had sketched an auxiliary organ near the spine. A mana gland. What the fuck? The summoning had just casually rewritten their biology? Cole sighed. At least they were getting proper documentation of their modifications, though he'd have preferred a simple system interface at this point. Seeing his INT and STR would have been far less existentially concerning than spontaneous organ generation. Judging from their looks, his buddies probably thought the same. Fotham didn't seem to care much for Ethan's 1,000-yard stare. You'll find that magic depends rather intimately on one's capacity for visualization. Some mages need only think to shape their spells, while others require the structure of proper incantations. Rather like music, if you will, most shall find themselves bound to their sheets. Others, more fortunately endowed, might hear the entire symphony in their minds. Observe, if you would, the formation of a simple barrier. A faint distortion rippled through the air, reminiscent of heat waves off summer asphalt. It started to emit a subtle blue light, as if applying a glow filter to reality. The effect stabilized into a reticulated pattern, interlocking hexagons translucent but distinct. The purple liquid in the manometer rose smoothly through the first bulb, settling just past the second marking. This imagination, you understand, serves as both instrument and orchestration in this singular arrangement. Though I suppose those unfortunate souls who cannot summon even a whisper of melody in their minds shall find themselves forever in the audience, so to speak. The barrier shifted under Fotham's direction, tilting, contracting, expanding like someone was messing around with a model in AutoCAD or Blender. Each transformation maintained that same hexagonal stability, though the patterns flowed and redistributed with each change. The manometer throughout all this saw only the smallest of fluctuations. To form such a barrier, first, you must sense your mana. You'll find it rather like becoming aware of your pulse, though in this case you're seeking a particular warmth of current flowing through your nerves. Cole focused on his arm, trying to isolate any sensation that wasn't just normal muscle tension or blood flow. There, something different. Turns out Fotham wasn't bullshitting. It was a warmth in his blood that seemed to respond to his nerve impulses flowing from that new organ. Kinda like adrenaline, but controllable somehow. Having found that sensation, direct it outward through your arm as if pressing against something unseen. It felt truly strange, about the same level as trying to control each individual toe. Yet, there was a natural feel to it. The sensation intensified and spread across his arm. As he built up the energy, he caught new diagrams on the wall, 5 sequential sketches showing the progression of barrier magic. First figure radiating waves, then containing them before stretching it into a plane. You shall feel resistance as the mana takes form. Picture that resistance shaping itself, rather like cupping water in your hands, but not overflowing. Allow your mana to find its natural form much as water seeks its sphere. Cole was nearly on the verge of asking why Fotham didn't bother starting with verbal incantations when the air in front of his arm rippled. The man smiled. Well, if this was a test, then Cole sure as hell wasn't going to fail it. Now then, visualize the pattern as it forms, much as ice spreading across a winter pond. The more clearly you hold that image in mind, the more readily your mana shall align. Right. Like the fourth diagram, the transformation from compressed energy to crystalline structure. The distortion wavered as Cole tried to find that point. Not quite ice forming on a pond, more like those videos of ferrofluid snapping into patterns under magnetic fields. The air shimmered, the plane of mana almost settling into geometry, then destabilized again. Glancing to his sides, Miles seemed to be around the same stage, whereas Ethan had already formed his very own barrier. Not surprising, given the level of spatial visualization that bomb disposal demanded. Cole took a breath before trying again. The manometer's purple liquid oscillated with their attempts, maintaining this kind of precise pressure while simultaneously drawing more unknown energy through his system required nothing short of his full concentration. Then it clicked. Cymatics. Those elaborate patterns formed by sound frequencies. The barrier's hexagonal structure suddenly seemed less arbitrary. If mana behaved anything like other wave phenomena, those patterns represented points of stability. Sort of like how blast waves created predictable patterns, except this was holding a standing wave in place instead of letting it propagate outward. Though that raised the question of what happened when the resonance broke down. The thought barely finished forming. Cole's barrier snapped into place. A short wall composed of mana arranged in a honeycomb lattice. Maintaining resonance, he realized, was basically just holding a sustained note. Break concentration, lose the frequency, lose the barrier. A brief glimmer to his left flared up. Miles had finally gotten his pattern locked. "Excellent progress, gentlemen." Fotham's pleased expression carried the same quiet pride Cole had seen in his old drill instructors, the ones who'd set up damn near impossible challenges just to watch their trainees rise to meet them. "Now then, shall we proceed with proper measurement?" "Sure," Cole said. "If you would, Sergeant Walker." Fotham indicated the marked line before the manometer. "Direct as much mana as you can summon into your barrier. One must have a proper measure of your capacity, you see." The purple liquid responded the moment Ethan took position, climbing smoothly through the first bulb and into the second. Foreign numerals aside, the progression seemed logical enough. Had to be some inverse square relationship at play, given how particular they were about that 3-foot mark. The fluid kept rising as Ethan held his barrier. No shock there. He'd been the first to get it right. This kind of visualization probably felt like a vacation compared to picturing bomb internals. By the time it pushed through the third bulb and settled near the first mark of the fourth, Cole had already done the math. "Level 10, Fotham nodded, writing something in a notebook. The repeating patterns in their numerals had suggested base 10. Nice to have confirmation. 10 out of 20, huh? Ethan grinned. "Yeah, guess I'll take that." Max sure as hell would love this. Hell, it'd be pretty poetic, rather funny as shit, if their resident enthusiast turned out to have the most pedestrian metrics, but right now, Cole had more pressing concerns. The imminent assessment of his own magical aptitude weighed on him. He wouldn't ask for much. Manifesting some absurd statistical outlier like any other Isekai protagonist would be great, but he'd settle for demonstrably competent. Though given Celdorne's apparent penchant for expedited integration, he doubted they'd get much time to dwell on the results either way. All the time in the world to make it a pissing contest with the boys, though. "Captain?" Moment of truth. Time to find out just what the summoning had given him. Cole took position. Right then. Flood the barrier with every bit of mana he could muster. The fluid rose through the first bulb almost immediately, his barrier snapping into that hexagonal resonance without the earlier wobble. Practice made perfect, apparently. The second chamber filled as he pushed harder. Different sensation now, like pressing against an invisible wall while that warmth flooded through his nervous system. His barrier flickered brighter, patterns growing more distinct as he forced more power through them. The liquid crept into the third chamber. More. The warmth flowed through his body as he channeled everything he had, past Ethan's mark now, climbing toward the second line of the fourth bulb. Cole grit his teeth, maintaining that perfect resonance even as the energy threatened to destabilize. The fluid finally settled. Level 12. Was that satisfaction on Fotham's face? Cole held back a smirk. Not bad for a nice little tour de force. Definitely not bad considering the high probability of the alternative level 1 cliché. Now to see what Miles could do. Miles took his position, expression focused as he formed his barrier. The liquid climbed steadily through the chambers, finally settling at the first mark of the fourth bulb. Level 10. Fotham nodded, then lowered his voice. Well then. 3 competent heroes at the price of a single summoning. Not the most remarkable heroes one might hope for, perhaps, though I dare say rather efficient in terms of expense. Remarkable heroes? Hell, if Fotham was still disappointed, just what kind of monsters were they supposed to be fighting? Now then, I believe His Majesty mentioned showing you about the grounds. There are several matters which may be of interest to you. The library, the training yards, and of course, the armory. Cole couldn't disagree. Yeah, it'd be pretty interesting to see just how those guns of theirs worked, and more importantly, how they interacted with magic. Lead the way. Fotham guided them through an adjoining door from the lab section. It opened directly onto what had to be the castle's research library. 3 floors of shelving with the same Victorian sensibilities as everywhere else. A network of copper pipes crossed the ceiling, keeping the books cool and dry. He led them past empty reading tables to a section near the entrance. "Your preliminary materials for the orientation period," Fotham explained, indicating the prepared books before gesturing to the brass gates that barred the upper floors. "Further resources shall become available to you once you've been properly integrated with OTAC." Cole pulled out a random volume while Ethan and Miles looked around. Maybe it just took a while for translation to kick in. Unsurprisingly, the spine's script remained as stubbornly foreign as the placard outside the testing room. Still, he grabbed another, that familiar, futile optimism of rechecking an empty fridge. No joy. He slid it back with a sigh. Fotham's